Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we condense the mountain of research, hack through the jargon, and really try to deliver the insights that matter most to you.
And we are your guides to the material today.
Mm-hmm.
We're tackling something that, well, it impacts nearly all of us, yet we still often frame it as some kind of personal failing.
Oh yeah, we all know that feeling. That one task, maybe it's an email, maybe it's doing your budget, maybe it's that huge strategic plan, just sitting there on your desk or in your inbox, just demanding attention.
Yeah.
It almost feels like the One Ring from Lord of the Rings, heavy, sort of toxic, and you just feel this pull. You know you should deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know the clock's ticking, but instead, we choose to delay.
Voluntarily, right. But irrationally, even though we know there are going to be negative consequences down the line.
And that's pretty much the formal definition of procrastination. The scale of it, though, is just staggering. This isn't just some quirky habit. It seems to be a really fundamental human trait.
Yeah, the comprehensive literature survey we've analyzed today, it synthesizes findings from, get this, over 100 recent studies. And it estimates procrastination affects anywhere from, say, 20% up to an incredible 95% of people, depending on the context.
95%. That's
Yeah.
Wow. That means almost everyone listening right now is probably wrestling with this impulse in some way.
It's highly likely, yes.
So what if that constant urge to delay, to put things off, what if it isn't just laziness or weak willpower? What if it's actually some kind of deep evolutionary strategy, something that was maybe even useful for survival way back when?
That's exactly the core idea we're exploring in this deep dive. We're
Yeah.
aiming to move way beyond the usual time management tips.
Right. No more Pomodoro technique recommendations here.
Today, no, we're going straight to the core.
Yeah.
The neurobiology, the psychological drivers, and, yeah, those surprising evolutionary roots. Our mission really is to reveal why that urge to delay might be quite literally written into our brain's fundamental architecture.
So we're talking about procrastination as this complex thing, multifaceted, with real implications for our brains, our health, our well-being.
Seriously, it's a much bigger story than just being lazy.
Okay, so let's unpack this. If we really want to understand procrastination, we need to look inside the skull, right? What's happening in the brain. The research seems to show that every time you choose to put off a task, you're basically witnessing this, like a civil war happening in your head.
That's a great analogy, actually. It's the impulsive side, the feel-good right now system, battling it out with the rational, future-oriented planner part of you.
Yeah.
And that internal conflict is exactly what the neurobiological research pinpoints. Procrastination seems to fundamentally arise from this tension between the older, more reactive parts of the brain, that's the limbic system, which handles emotions and immediate urges.
Okay, the emotional brain.
Right. And the newer, more strategic part, the prefrontal cortex, or PFC, that's your executive control center.
So it's like, I'm thinking comic books here. It's like Captain America, the strategist with the long-term plan, versus the Hulk who just wants to smash the immediate problem and, feel better now.
That captures it perfectly. The strategist versus the immediate emotional reaction. And the key region where this battle plays out, the sort of highest level traffic cop, is the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC.
The AC's okay, what does it do?
The ACC is this critical decision-making hub. It's constantly integrating cost-benefit calculations. So it's weighing the immediate, often high cost of effort right now against the maybe fuzzy, delayed benefit of the reward later. And the choice to procrastinate, to avoid that immediate effort, is ultimately made right there in the ACC. It really depends on which system, the limbic or the prefrontal, is shouting louder at that moment.
But hang on, the research also suggests that for people who are chronic procrastinators, maybe this isn't always a fair fight. Like some people might be neurologically primed to lose that battle more often.
That's one of the most compelling and maybe even a bit humbling findings from neuroimaging studies. When researchers look at the brains of chronic procrastinators, they consistently see structural differences.
Structural differences, like the brain is physically different.
Yes. Specifically, they tend to exhibit reduced gray matter volumes in a key area of the prefrontal cortex, the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or DLPFC.
Reduced gray matter volume.
Oh.
Okay, that sounds significant. It's not just about brain activity changing moment to moment, it's the actual structure. So what does having a smaller DLPFC actually mean for someone's day-to-day behavior?
Right, so the DLPFC is really the central hub for things like self-control, working memory, cognitive regulation, and, this is crucial, inhibition.
Inhibition, like stopping yourself from doing something impulsive.
Exactly. Think of it as the brain's ultimate brake pedal. So if you have reduced volume in this region, it seems to translate directly into, well, deficient self-control abilities. It means the brain is just less effective at putting the brakes on an emotional impulse.
So when the limbic system screams, this task feels bad, avoid it, the DLPFC's ability to say, no, stop, think long term is physically weaker.
The capacity to inhibit that avoidance impulse appears physically diminished compared to non-procrastinators. It's less about willpower in that moment and potentially more about the available neural machinery.
Wow. Okay, so it's not that they don't care about the deadline necessarily. It's that their ability to slam the brakes on the impulse for immediate comfort is physically weaker. That completely reframes it, doesn't it? Away from just willpower.
It really does shift the perspective towards capacity. And the brain activity patterns seem to back this up too. Resting state fMRI studies looking at brain activity when someone isn't doing a specific task show that chronic procrastination correlates positively with hyperactivity in other regions.
Oh, hyperactivity. Where?
Specifically in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPSC, and the parahippocampal cortex. These are areas associated more with immediate pleasure, emotional processing, and sort of mental escape.
Okay, so the DLPFC, the brake pedal, is maybe smaller or less effective, and at the same time, these other areas linked to immediate gratification and like daydreaming about something nicer, they're overactive.
That seems to be the pattern. The VMPFC is involved in processing reward value, especially immediate reward, and the parahippocampal cortex is linked to something called episodic prospection.
Episodic prospection. Sounds fancy. What's that?
It's basically the ability to vividly imagine future scenarios. But here's the twist for procrastinators. This prospection often seems hyper-focused on imagining immediate emotional relief, not the long-term goal.
So instead of imagining the satisfaction of finishing that report next week...
Right, the brain vividly imagines the pleasure of scrolling through social media or watching a video right now. It conjures up this really compelling, immediate, emotional daydream that effectively overrides the signals from the higher cognitive control areas, like the DLPFC.
It's like the short-term pleasure centers are just shouting down the long-term planner.
They're louder, yes. And this connects really nicely to another crucial finding from neurocomputation, which is about how the brain calculates future tasks. It seems procrastination fundamentally stems from the temporal discounting of effort.
Temporal discounting of effort. Okay, I think I know standard temporal discounting, like $1,000 today feels worth more than $1,000 next year.
Exactly. The perceived value of the reward decreases as the delay increases.
So how is discounting effort different? Is it that we don't discount the reward as much?
Interestingly, it seems we might not discount the final reward itself as drastically. It's the effort required to get there that gets heavily discounted over time. Research suggests the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex signals the expected effort costs of a task. For chronic procrastinators, this signal, the feeling of how hard something will be, gets drastically weakened by delay.
Okay, walk me through an example of that. How does that play out?
Sure. Let's say you need to file a really complex insurance claim. Thinking about doing it now, the effort feels huge, right? Gathering papers, making calls, navigating bureaucracy. It feels exhausting just thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely.
But if your brain calculates the effort needed to do it, say, next month, suddenly that effort feels almost non-existent. It's like the brain applies this weird cognitive bias that says, oh, future me is amazing. Future me is organized, energetic, totally capable of handling this impossible task with ease.
Right. Future me is a superhero.
Pretty much. The perceived effort cost is discounted down to almost zero. This makes the task seem so much less strenuous in the distant future compared to how it feels right now. And that allows for immediate relief avoiding the task now without the perceived consequence of facing an insurmountable effort later, because future you will handle it. So if we move beyond just the neural wiring and connect this brain conflict to the bigger psychological picture, what we find is that the real driving force behind chronic delay, it's almost always emotion, not time management.
Huh. I think most people, probably myself included, tend to assume procrastination is just, a failure of planning. Or maybe not having the right app or system.
And that assumption is precisely what a lot of modern research contradicts. The most powerful explanation right now seems to be emotion regulation theory.
Emotion regulation theory. Okay.
Basically, It posits that procrastination often serves as well, a dysfunctional emotion regulation strategy.
Dysfunctional how?
When we're faced with a task that feels aversive, maybe it triggers anxiety or frustration or boredom or even self-doubt, we prioritize short-term mood repair over the long-term goal.
We're giving in to feel good, like you said earlier. We avoid the source of the discomfort to instantly feel better, even though somewhere deep down we probably know that avoidance is just going to lead to worse feelings later on.
Exactly that. The short-term mood payoff is immediate, and it's guaranteed 5 minutes of scrolling feels better now. The long-term goal achievement, that's delayed, maybe uncertain. The brain, especially the limbic system, opts for the immediate, certain emotional relief.
And I guess tasks that feel particularly bad, really hard ones, or ones where we might be judged or fail, those are the prime candidates for procrastination.
They're the primary precursors, yes. Tasks perceived as highly aversive, maybe involving high cognitive load, critical evaluation, or a significant risk of failure, are much more likely to trigger this avoidance response.
Okay, so emotion is key. How do we kind of formalize that interplay between the timing, the delay, and that impulsive need for immediate relief?
That's captured really beautifully by the temporal motivation theory, or TMT. It was developed by researcher Piers Steele, and it's probably the most comprehensive theoretical framework we have because it integrates everything: our expectation of success, our impulsiveness, and the critical element of time or delay.
Right, I've seen the formula. Let's try and break down Steele's TMT formula. It looks a bit intimidating at first glance.
It does, but it's actually quite elegant. The formula for motivation is motivation, expectancy of value, 1 plus impulsiveness x delay.
Okay, expectancy times value on top. That makes sense. How much you expect to succeed times how much you value the outcome.
Right. That's the potential drive.
But it's the bottom part, the denominator, 1 plus impulsiveness x delay. That seems to be where the procrastination really kicks in. That's the crushing part.
That denominator really demonstrates the core mechanism. Look what happens as delay increases, as the deadline gets further away. The whole denominator gets bigger, which means the overall motivation fraction shrinks. Motivation plummets.
Okay.
But then look at the impulsiveness variable. It acts as a multiplier on delay. So if you're highly impulsive, you really crave immediate gratification. That impulsiveness dramatically amplifies the negative effect of the delay.
Ah, I see. So if you have low expectancy, maybe you don't really believe you can do the task well and you're highly impulsive, then even a moderate delay can just absolutely crush your motivation down to 0 long before the deadline even looms.
Precisely. That delay term, magnified by impulsiveness, just whites out the drive. Low self-efficacy and high impulsiveness are consistently found to be the strongest predictors of chronic procrastination, according to TMT.
So going back to the example of writing a thesis, if you're 6 months out, that huge delay term multiplied by maybe high impulsiveness just results in 0 motivation. But what about that last-minute panic, when suddenly people do get motivated?
Right, the deadline miracle. What happens at, say, 11:59 p.m. before a hard deadline?
The delay is tiny.
Exactly. The delay term becomes virtually 0. Suddenly that denominator, 1 plus impulsiveness x delay, becomes very close to just 1, and boom, the expectancy and value, which might still be high because you do want the reward, can finally drive motivation, often leading to that intense burst of last-minute effort.
But relying on that is probably not ideal.
Fundamentally dysfunctional, yeah. It maximizes stress, usually reduces the quality of the work, and it reinforces the cycle. TMT really highlights why addressing both self-efficacy and impulsiveness is key.
This sounds incredibly closely related to what we call executive function. You know, the brain's ability to manage itself, plan, organize, inhibit impulses. Is procrastination basically an executive function issue?
It's deeply inextricably linked. There was some groundbreaking research by Rabin and colleagues that established really strong correlations here.
What did they find?
They found that procrastination correlates significantly with all 9 clinical domains of executive functioning.
All 9. Wow. That covers pretty much everything, doesn't it? Planning, organizing?
Yep. Planning, organization, task initiation, working memory, self-monitoring, inhibition, there it is again, emotional control, activity shifting, basically the whole suite of self-management skills.
And the correlations were strong.
Remarkably strong. The effect sizes they reported ranged from R0.65 to 0.83. That level of correlation is quite high in psychological research. It led them to suggest that procrastination might represent, and I'm quoting here, an expression of subtle executive dysfunction, even in people who are otherwise neurologically healthy.
That's a really crucial insight. because it implies that for some people, it's not just a simple choice to delay. It might reflect a genuine difficulty in actually mustering the cognitive resources needed to start and stick with a task.
Yes, although we do need to maintain a careful distinction. Procrastination is still typically defined by that voluntary delay aspect. It's different from a diagnosed executive dysfunction, like you might see in ADHD, where the inability to act due to capacity limits is more pronounced.
Okay.
However, what's interesting is that studies show when you put neurologically healthy individuals under high cognitive load, you deplete their executive resources, make them tired, or stress their tendency to procrastinate increases significantly.
So self-control is like a muscle. It gets tired.
It seems finite, yes. And when those resources are low, the brain is more likely to revert to that easier, impulsive, immediate gratification strategy. The limbic system takes over more easily.
Okay, we can't talk about putting things off without bringing up the big villain of self-help books. Perfectionism. You hear it all the time, right? Oh, I procrastinate because I'm such a perfectionist. How does the research actually view this relationship? Is it real?
It is real, but it's paradoxical. The key is that perfectionism isn't just one thing. Research clearly splits it into two different types.
Okay.
First, there's perfectionistic concerns. This is the fear-driven side. Worrying intensely about making mistakes, being terrified of negative evaluation from others, crippling self-doubt. This type of perfectionism positively correlates with procrastination. The effect size is around R.23.
So that's the paralysis by analysis or the paralytic gap people talk about. The standard feels so impossibly high, and the fear of failing to meet it is so intense that the only way to guarantee you don't fail is to never actually finish or maybe even start.
Exactly. It's avoidance masquerading as high standards. If I never submit the final version, it can never be judged as imperfect. The task itself becomes so loaded with anxiety that the immediate mood repair mechanism procrastination becomes the default response.
But you said there are two types. What's the other one?
The other type is perfectionistic strivings. This is about setting high personal standards, genuinely striving for excellence, being conscientious, but without that paralyzing fear of failure. And here's the twist. This type negatively correlates with procrastination. The effect size is similar, around R-gaugeably of 1.22.
So people who just have high standards and work hard towards them but aren't crippled by fear are actually less likely to procrastinate.
That's what the data suggests. The real culprit driving procrastination isn't the high standards themselves. It's the underlying fear of not being perfect, the fear of judgment.
Okay, this is where things get really fascinating for me. We're shifting from the neuroscience of right now, the brain battles happening today, to the deep history of the brain. If this conflict is so hardwired and that impulsive side seems so dominant sometimes, who programmed that impulse in the first place? Let's trace this back, way back.
We really have to step back, maybe about 100,000 years or more into our evolutionary past. To understand why we delay writing a report due next Tuesday, we kind of need to understand why our ancestors probably weren't making detailed 5-year plans.
Right.
First, just to anchor this in biology, let's talk genetics. Twin studies have consistently shown that procrastination is moderately heritable. Estimates range from around 22% up to maybe 46%.
Okay, so definitely not just a learned behavior. There's a biological predisposition we can inherit.
There seems to be, yes. But maybe even more fundamentally, the most compelling finding that really grounds the evolutionary argument is the genetic relationship between procrastination and impulsivity.
Impulsivity again. What's the link?
The studies suggest they show complete genetic overlap. A genetic correlation of 1.0.
1.0, complete. That's scientifically huge, isn't it?
It's an astonishing finding. It means they aren't really two separate traits that happen to evolve alongside each other. They appear to be different facets of the very same underlying genetic architecture. They likely stem from shared evolutionary origins.
Wow, so understanding the genetics of why we put things off is essentially the same problem as understanding the genetics of why we act impulsively.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Impulsivity in our ancestral past wasn't necessarily a flaw. It was likely highly adaptive.
How so?
Think about the environment our ancestors lived in. It was harsh, unpredictable. Saber-toothed cats lurking, food sources appearing and disappearing. In that kind of world, prioritizing immediate responses was probably crucial for survival.
Like, run now from the predator, don't plan your escape route for tomorrow.
Precisely. Immediate action, fleeing danger, seizing a sudden food opportunity, like ripe berries you stumble upon, was likely key when the next day was uncertain, as the researchers put it.
Yeah, if you found a patch of fruit, the best strategy might have been to eat it all right then and there. Planning to save some for tomorrow was risky. Maybe the fruit would be gone. Maybe you'd be gone.
That idea is strongly supported by something called life history theory. This theory looks at how organisms allocate their limited resources between immediate survival needs and longer-term goals, like growth and reproduction. Procrastination, in this light, prioritizing immediate emotional or physical reward, looks a lot like what they call a fast life history strategy.
A fast life history strategy.
Yeah, it's a strategy that prioritizes immediate returns, getting benefits now, especially when the environment signals high uncertainty or low predictability about the future. If the future looks dicey, grab what you can today.
And we even saw hints of this recently, didn't we, during the pandemic?
We absolutely did. Research documented a measurable increase in chronic procrastination during the intense uncertainty of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So when things feel unstable on a large scale,
it seems to activate that primal part of the brain. The individual defaults more towards prioritizing immediate emotional comfort, immediate rewards. It confirms how this fast life strategy might function. The brain instinctively hedges against an uncertain future by seeking instant payoffs.
Okay, but then something changed in our evolution. Roughly 100,000 years ago, give or take, our brain structure developed this massive prefrontal cortex.
Right, the game changer.
This allowed for incredibly complex things. Social planning, abstract thought, tracking long-term goals, basically all the capabilities you need to build civilizations.
That's absolutely essential, and that's exactly where we hit the modern crisis point, what researchers call the evolutionary temporal mismatch.
Temporal mismatch, meaning our timing is off.
Kind of. Our older limbic system is still optimized for that ancient world of immediate threats and immediate rewards. But modern life, especially since agriculture and complex societies developed, increasingly demands that the newer prefrontal cortex be dominant. It requires sustained, often monotonous, continuous work for rewards that might be months, years, even decades away, like getting a degree, saving for retirement, completing a massive project.
So when my modern self sits down to, I don't know, fill out complicated tax forms or write a long, boring report,
your ancient limbic system registers the high cognitive effort, the lack of any immediate physical reward or pleasure, and it basically sounds the alarm. Danger, this feels bad. Avoid, seek immediate concrete resources or comfort.
It treats the spreadsheet like a saber-toothed cat.
In a sense, yes. It's triggering an ancient avoidance mechanism. Anthropological research backs this up too, noting that many hunter-gatherer societies tended to operate on what they call heightened immediacy and responsivity. Tasks were often short, varied, and interspersed with frequent breaks in social interaction.
Which sounds nothing like a modern 8-hour workday staring at a screen.
Exactly. Our modern environment demanding long stretches of uninterrupted, focused, often abstract work, rewarded maybe by a paycheck weeks later or an annual review. It's profoundly unnatural compared to the conditions our brains primarily evolved in. So procrastination can be seen as a natural response to these unnatural modern demands.
It's like the voice from our Paleolithic past, as the research puts it, rebelling against this relentless pressure for long-term delayed gratification.
That's a great way to put it. It completely reframes procrastination, doesn't it? It shifts it away from being purely a moral failing, like laziness, towards understanding it as an ancient survival mechanism, an adaptive trait from a very different era that's now firing at inappropriate times in our modern context. #V. The consequences and solutions for the modern world. Now, understanding those evolutionary roots, it helps build compassion, maybe reduces some shame. But we absolutely cannot ignore the fact that in the modern world, this ancient mechanism is often highly maladaptive. The consequences of chronic procrastination today are serious, and they're far-reaching.
Yeah, we touched on the stress aspect earlier, but let's really dive into health implications that the sources talk about. They sound pretty significant.
The health impact is definitely one of the most concerning findings. There's extensive longitudinal research studies that follow people over time. For instance, a major Swedish cohort study looked at over 1,500 university students.
Okay, what did they find tracking them over time?
They found a clear predictive relationship. Higher levels of procrastination at the start significantly predicted increased mental health issues 9 months later. Specifically, increases in depression, with a beta coefficient of 0.13, anxiety, beta of 0.08, and perceived stress, beta of 0.11.
Okay, wait. That beta value, 0.13 for depression. That means procrastination wasn't just correlated with depression at the same time, it actually predicted an increase in depression later on.
That's what the longitudinal data suggest, controlling for initial levels. The chronic behavior of delaying tasks seems to actively contribute to worsening mental distress over time.
Wow, that's heavy. And it's not just mental health, is it?
No, it extends to physical health, too.
Hmm.
Chronic procrastinators are often less likely to engage in preventative health behaviors. Think about it: delaying making that dentist appointment, putting off scheduling a checkup, maybe being inconsistent with necessary medication routines.
Yeah, that makes sense. Avoidance applied to health.
Right. And this leads to measurable downstream problems.
Mm.
Things like poor sleep quality, higher rates of chronic physical inactivity, and even a higher incidence of disabling physical pain. The behavior itself seems to create this really nasty, vicious cycle.
How does the cycle work?
Well, the procrastination leads to stress, guilt, maybe frantic last-minute rushes, missed deadlines. All of that depletes the very cognitive resources, that executive function capacity we talked about, that you need to actually overcome the impulse to procrastinate in the future. So the procrastination makes you stressed, and the stress makes it harder not to procrastinate. It becomes a trap.
A self-perpetuating loop. And what about the impact beyond the individual, like in the workplace, the economy?
The figures there are pretty dramatic, too. Workplace procrastination is incredibly common. Some estimates say it affects around 88% of employees to some degree.
88%.
Yeah. It leads to project bottlenecks, missed deadlines, general inefficiencies. The economic cost isn't trivial either. One estimate calculated it at over $15,000 in lost productivity per salaried employee each year. That adds up across an economy.
Okay, so if our caveman brain, with its need for immediate gratification, is the engine driving this, what's the modern fuel? You mentioned distractions.
Right. If the ancient brain is the engine, then social media is definitely the turbocharger.
Huh. Perfect analogy. Accelerating the problem.
Absolutely. Social media platforms and the internet more broadly seem almost perfectly engineered to exploit our inherent impulsivity and that desire for immediate reward. Research consistently shows they represent the single largest source of procrastination, especially for students. 74% of students identify internet distractions as primary culprits.
It makes sense. It's the perfect engineered immediate reward, isn't it? Constant notifications pinging you.
Variable reinforcement schedules with things like the infinite scroll. Instant, low-effort gratification. It's perfectly positioned to compete against the high-effort, delayed gratification of doing actual meaningful work.
It directly tickles those reward pathways, right? The VMPFC regions you mentioned earlier.
It seems to directly stimulate them, yeah. Offering that immediate emotional relief, maybe feeding our fear of missing out, FOMO, driving these compulsive checking behaviors that just constantly drain those finite, self-regulatory resources we need for focused work.
Okay. So we understand the deep roots, we see the modern consequences, we know the triggers like social media. How do we actually start finding solutions? Solutions that maybe work with our brain's ancient programming instead of just trying to fight it head-on with sheer willpower, which often fails.
That's the key: working with our evolutionary tendencies, not just against them. And the good news is, established interventions do show consistent effectiveness when they target the right mechanisms.
Like what? What actually works?
Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, for example, consistently shows medium to large effect sizes in reducing procrastination.
Why CBT?
Because it directly targets the underlying cognitive distortions, those irrational beliefs about effort, failure, avoidance. I have to feel motivated before I start. This has to be perfect. Avoiding this will make me feel better. And the resulting avoidance behaviors. And importantly, internet-based CBT is also proving to be quite scalable and effective, making it more accessible. And given that the core issue often boils down to emotion regulation.
Right, avoiding bad feelings.
Interventions that specifically focus on building emotion regulation skills are really promising. The goal isn't necessarily to eliminate the anxiety or frustration or boredom associated with a difficult task that might be impossible.
So what is the goal?
It's more about increasing your tolerance for those negative emotions. Learning to sit with the discomfort without immediately needing to escape it. Techniques like mindfulness, for instance, can help improve emotional awareness, noticing the urge to avoid, noticing the negative feeling, and then consciously choosing a more constructive response instead of just instinctively defaulting to avoidance.
Okay, so managing the reaction to the feeling, not necessarily the feeling itself. What about structuring our work? If we're dealing with a brain hardwired for immediate, concrete rewards, how do we trick our inner caveman into actually starting that big, scary project?
We have to implement strategies informed by things like TMT and our understanding of evolutionary biology. 3 key things come to mind.
Okay.
1, break down large projects. Sounds basic, but it's paramount. A giant multi-month project is kryptonite to the procrastinating brain. Yeah. You have to break it down into tiny micro tasks, things that maybe take only 10 or 15 minutes.
Why does that help so much?
Because it creates frequent, immediate feedback cycles. You get small wins quickly, and that satisfies the Paleolithic brain's craving for rapid, clear results and builds momentum. Finish a small piece, feel a small sense of accomplishment, get a small dopamine hit.
Okay, break it down. What else?
2. Consider reward substitution. This involves pairing a necessary, maybe unpleasant task with an immediate, genuinely pleasurable activity. For instance, you only allow yourself to listen to your absolute favorite podcast while you're doing the dishes, or you only watch the next episode of that addictive show while you're folding laundry or processing emails.
So the unpleasant task becomes the key that unlocks the immediate pleasure.
Exactly. It hijacks the reward system in a positive way.
Clever. Okay, number 3.
3. Create immediate rewards for long-term goals. Don't wait until the entire marathon is run or the whole report is filed to reward yourself. Reward the starting steps. Reward the act of just sitting down and opening the document. Reward completing the first 10 minutes. These need to be small, immediate reinforcements. Maybe a 5-minute break to stretch, a quick favorite song, a piece of chocolate, whatever works for you. It satisfies that evolutionary reward-seeking system by attaching instant positive feelings to the initiation of the difficult behavior, which is often the hardest part.
It sounds less like grim self-discipline and much more like strategically designing a favorable behavioral environment for yourself.
It's strategy, absolutely, not martyrdom. And looking ahead, the future of intervention is likely moving towards even more personalized approaches. Think precision medicine for procrastination.
Precision medicine. How would that work?
Researchers are exploring combining neuroimaging data, maybe looking at that DLPFC volume, with genetic testing, identifying specific genetic markers related to dopamine regulation, for instance, and potentially using real-time data from wearables like stress levels or activity patterns.
Wow. So using all that data.
The goal would be to move beyond generic tips and create truly personalized intervention plans tailored to an individual's specific neurobiological profile and real-time state. #VCI. Outro and final thought.
Okay, let's try and wrap this really fascinating deep dive up. If you're going to walk away from this discussion with just 3 key insights, 3 ways to maybe reframe procrastination forever, here's what they might be.
Yeah, first is takeaway 1. Procrastination is fundamentally a brain battle. Remember that internal conflict. It's your ancient, impulsive limbic system, often hyperactive in areas craving immediate relief like the VMPFC, clashing with your newer, rational prefrontal cortex. And sometimes this conflict is rooted in actual physical differences, like maybe reduced gray matter in that key self-control region, the DLPFC.
Okay, brain battle. Got it. Takeaway 2. Procrastination is often dysfunctional emotion regulation. It's usually not about laziness. It's primarily driven by the desire to avoid tasks that make you feel bad, anxious, bored, stressed, inadequate. That choice to delay is essentially a short-term, instant mood repair strategy. Piers Steele's temporal motivation theory explains this perfectly. High delay and high impulsiveness just crush motivation.
Right. And finally, takeaway 3. It's an evolutionary mismatch. This tendency shares complete genetic overlap with impulsivity, a trait that was actually critical for survival back when our environment was highly uncertain. So procrastination is like an ancient adaptive mechanism that's now firing inappropriately in our modern world, a world that demands long-term planning, leading to all those negative health and productivity consequences we discussed.
Understanding it this way, reframing it from just a source of shame or a moral failing to seeing it as a window into our own human evolutionary history, it allows us to be maybe more compassionate with ourselves, but also more effective in the strategies we choose. We have to acknowledge this inner voice, this echo from our Paleolithic past, but we don't necessarily have to obey it.
It's about acknowledging those inherited tendencies while consciously, strategically creating environments and using techniques that help bridge that gap between our ancient programming and our modern demands.
So the next time you find yourself staring at that blank screen or that pile of laundry and you feel that almost overwhelming urge to just check your phone instead, remember your brain might just be trying to survive a mammoth encounter that isn't actually there. Knowing that your impulse is, in part, an ancient survival mechanism demanding an immediate payoff, here's something to think about. What small, immediate reward, something maybe completely unrelated to the long-term goal, can you introduce right now to trick your caveman brain into just starting that difficult project?